Welcome to the Math Ed Podcast. My name is Sam Otten from the University of Missouri, and my guest today is Juli Dixon, who's a professor emerita from the University of Central Florida. Juli, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We are going to talk about Juli's long career in mathematics education, following some of the threads of her work and her research and some other writings that she's done. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So let's go back to the start. What were you doing before grad school? And then what was it that led you into grad school and pursuing kind of the research track in math education?
So I was a math teacher and I was teaching mostly middle school, but also in a K-8 setting. I decided that I wanted to become a mathematics teacher educator when I was in seventh grade. So I began preparing pretty early. My father is a retired science education professor.
Okay.
And so we've had the science math argument for years. But I was teaching and wanting to make sure that I was filling in my background before graduate school. I mean, I really started planning this early. And so I gathered teaching experience in every grade, including workplace numeracy. I worked with the Sheet Metal Workers Union and did a whole bunch on with fractions. So my love of fractions started early as well.
Wow. So when you were teaching, you already had in your mind that you want to kind of see this full grade level spectrum, like to gather as experience under your belt.
No, when I was in seventh grade, I decided to do this.
Wow. And were there any particular grades that you really enjoyed the most while you were going through the teaching part of things?
I would say grades 3 through 8, but I was most comfortable in grades 5 through 8 because I can be a little bit sarcastic, and that played well in those middle grades.
Yeah. Yeah. Sarcasm can be dangerous with the younger kids because it doesn't hit them right. They're not quite sure what's going on. And then don't tell somebody else I said that. I was being sarcastic.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Okay, so then when did you make the move to grad school? And tell us a little bit about that. You were going forward in your plan, but what was that moment like when you decided I am going to grad school now, going for the doctorate?
Right. So I got my master's while I was teaching, and my master's at Syracuse University was half mathematics education,
Hmm.
and then moved on to the University of Florida. I was very interested in problem solving. My father's dissertation was on problem solving in science education.
Hmm.
Mary Grace Kentowski was doing work at the University of Florida. And so I moved from New York to Florida to pursue my degree there.
Okay, wow. Now to take us into the University of Florida then, what was it like there? What did you get involved with, and what were the ideas, in addition to problem solving, maybe in detail that you started working on?
University of Florida was hard. My doctorate was hard. I mean, I think we shouldn't forget how hard it is to get a PhD
Hmm.
and to begin your research journey. I needed to find a way to support myself through my doctorate. So before I went, I started applying for funding, and the US Department of Education had a bilingual, bicultural fellowship that I applied for, not being bilingual or bicultural, but from my teaching experience in New York, I was very, very interested in teaching mathematics to students who were learning English simultaneously. Because what I found was that my students in my math class would be in mathematics without supports as their first class without supports in their English learning journey in school. And so I was very, very curious and applied for this funding. I got it. I was quite surprised that I got it. And then I felt guilty that I got it because I'm not bilingual nor am I bicultural. And so I took Spanish during my entire doctoral program so that I was learning a language while I was going to school, and felt a little bit better about it.
Hmm.
But beginning my journey with Mary Grace Kentowski, I think she felt that I was pretty young and decided that I should spend a lot of time in graduate school. So she had me take 40 graduate credit hours of mathematics
Oh, wow.
along with my doctorate in mathematics
And
education.
this is after you already had a master's that was largely math as well.
Yeah, yeah. It was a lot and it was hard. She told me to do it because she said that I was young and had a long career in front of me. And if I was confident with my mathematics, I'd be confident in situations I found myself in as a mathematics educator. And while it was really painful and my doctorate took 5 years full time, it was a good decision and it has paid off for me quite well. And so that, listen to your advisor if you're working on your degree. They just might have something that, even though hard, will serve you well. And it did for me.
Yeah, and while you're in grad school, I still remember being in the trenches there, and it seems like never ending. It seems like there's so much you have to do, and you kind of just want to move on to the next step. But it is a period of time that's never going to happen again. This period of time where you're just kind of trying to learn as much as you can learn, and you're connecting things, and it can be really exciting. So you're doing the language stuff, you're also doing the math stuff, and then you're also doing the math ed core. So you're kind of just soaking all of this in from different angles.
Absolutely. And so your village is really important. I met Thomasina Adams as a doctoral student with her, and she is one of my closest friends. She was even in my wedding back in 1993. And last week, she officiated the wedding of my daughter.
Wow.
And so the people we meet in grad school matter so much. We should invest in those relationships. The payoff can be really huge for your whole career. We've researched together, written together, published together, presented together,
Mhm.
and have stayed very close friends.
Yeah, a recent episode I was having with Susan Empson, she was saying the same thing about Vicky Jacobs. Like, met in grad school, decades later, they're still writing things, they're still asking questions and collaborating.
Yeah, for us as well. For us as
Yeah.
well.
So on your dissertation, maybe just a little bit more about your dissertation. So you have the problem solving going on. There's bilingual students, students as they're learning language and math. How does it all come together? What do you end up sort of focusing on for your dissertation?
So I ended up focusing on geometry. And at the time, the Geometry Sketchpad had just been released, and I was really excited about it. And I was wondering how English learners would interact with the software and this new content that they were learning in middle school, transformation geometry. And so I met with Nick Jacku, the developer of the Geometry Sketchpad, and he created a version of the Sketchpad that had more context clues in the menu items to get a sense of what the prompts meant, like mirror, rotation, line of reflection, center of rotation. And we made these icons that went with them, and then I used them in my study. They didn't end up central to my study, but it was so much fun to be on the cutting edge of technology and researching with English learners. And so I looked at how English learners learn about transformation geometry in middle school in a dynamic setting, and it was exciting. It was an exciting project for me.
Hmm. And I think you stayed with that for a few years because when I was in grad school, I was taking a course on geometry and we read some of your articles. They especially had to do with the reflection and the rotation. And so that was where I first sort of became aware of you and your work was I thought like, oh yeah, Julie Dixon, she did some work on rotations and reflections. And if you're trying to think about that stuff dynamically, you need to read Julie Dixon's stuff. So does that bring us into the 90s? Is this now like after grad school that you kept writing about that for a bit or take us into that era?
Yeah, it did. I kept writing about that, but what kept resonating with me was the discourse that occurred as the students were exploring the math content.
Hmm.
So while I began focusing on that content area and the technology, what persisted was the discourse. And how can we support each and every learner to engage in discourse during mathematics learning?
Hmm. I want to throw out a couple articles in case people are interested, but I know you had some in the Bilingual Research Journal, so that was making some of that language connection. That was in 95, and you had School Science and Mathematics in 97, that I think is right in this wheelhouse that you're talking about right now. Are those articles correct?
Yes, so long ago. Wow. Yes, they are. And with them, I want to point out that, I mean, the Bilingual Research Journal may not be the journal you think of to publish mathematics research in
Hmm.
or mathematics education research, but we need to share what we're doing with a broader net, I think, so that more educators learn from our research in mathematics education and maybe apply it in other areas.
Hmm.
So yeah, I tried to publish broadly so that people could learn about what we're doing in math ed.
And when you think back on this time, I'm just thinking as a researcher too, the language stuff that's coming out of it, and you said it became really interesting. Was that happening where you were like doing some analysis of the math content and the technology, and as you were doing the analysis, did the language stuff just come to the fore, or was it more like over time you published a few things about the math content and the technology, and then your next articles were about the language part? Do you know what I mean? Did
Yeah.
it emerge in the analysis as you were writing even your first pieces, or was it kind of a trajectory where you published a few things on the content and then later published a few things on the language?
So I think it emerged. I hadn't set out to answer research questions related to discourse, but the discourse caught my attention.
Hmm.
So then I wanted to examine discourse in a more structured way. And that really occurred then as I looked at social and socio-mathematical norms in mathematics. So I met Michelle Steffen, and she came to the University of Central Florida. In between those, I kept working with the technology at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, my first position for 5 years there. And then as I moved to the University of Central Florida, I met Michelle Steffen, and she really taught me about classroom teaching experiments. The classroom teaching experiments gave me a methodology to use to examine questions that I really wanted to answer. And so that sort of describes my next era, I guess, of research, where I was looking at classroom teaching experiments with my doctoral students, guided by Michelle Steffen, and exploring social and socio-mathematical norms, which is interesting because I never stopped learning. And I think to better your research, you need to be open to guidance from others and to never stop learning. That was really new to me. I was learning about classroom teaching experiments while I was the coordinator of a doctoral program, guiding my own doctoral students to do research in the same area.
Yeah, I've had that a little bit as well with the doctoral student where I'm like, I don't really know much about that, but let's learn together. And in a year or so, we will both know quite a bit more about it.
Exactly, exactly. It may have taken me more than a year or so, but I kept learning and it was fascinating to me.
Yeah. So let's go into that social and sociomathematical norms work a little bit more. So first of all, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, what do you mean when you say sociomathematical norms? And then we can go a little bit into your work in that area.
Yeah, so the social norms describe our expectations for explaining and justifying during teaching, right? That we're going to explain and justify our answers. For me, I describe them as explain and justify your answers, make sense of each other's answers, say when you don't understand or don't agree. The socio-mathematical part of that is the mathematics focused area. So, what counts as an acceptable explanation or justification mathematically? So it's not just that we're talking, but that we're talking in a way that's defending the mathematics we're sharing at all ages.
Yeah, and that was what struck me about your work is you really did look at all ages. This is going back to your theme of like you're willing to try out the different grade levels. Because I noticed when I was looking back through your work ahead of this interview, you had some stuff that was on elementary sociomathematical norms, but I think you also had like adult learners and their sociomathematical norms. Is that true? You kind of were looking across the spectrum?
Absolutely. I had some work with high school, middle school calculus, but also kindergarten and first grade and pre-service teachers. I don't know, you've probably been in a situation where you're supporting teachers and they'll say, okay, that might work in this grade, but not my grade.
Hmm.
And that ends up being a way to take yourself off the hook
Hmm.
in that idea of discourse in the classroom. And so it was important to me to investigate and examine what discourse looked like at all grades so that I could respond with, I hear you, but from my experience and the research that I've been a part of, I can tell you that and maybe even model teach it in your classroom so you can see what it looks like.
And so, what were some of the key insights that you got out of your work? Or, like you said, you really were learning for years about these norms and things. What were some of the key insights where you're like, oh, I really kind of came to that conclusion or saw some nuance in it that you hadn't at the beginning?
So something that surprised me and I think is extremely important is that you don't just say the norms and move on. They are constantly supported and renegotiated with your students. The norms that we have in the classroom is like a dance where we share our expectations as teachers, students share their understanding. We help to refine. They help to let us know what they're willing to do. It's a constant dance. And then we change the norms. So, for example, make sure you're talking to each other, but not on this test. Oh, wait, what do you want from us? The students will respond with. So that you have to continue to renegotiate those norms and make your expectations explicit, and students need to make what they're willing to provide explicit as well.
Nice. I also want to circle back because I know you said from a young age you were interested in being a math teacher educator. And so you also have this teacher educator part of your whole career. And I know I'm mostly asking you about your research, and we could do a whole nother story about your teacher education side. But you had some research, I believe, that you published around teacher education. What were some of the things that you connected into that teacher ed space, thinking in a scholarly way?
So there's a few things. One is that I think that we're not focusing enough on content knowledge for teaching. We want teachers to do a lot of things that require them to think in real time, and they need to have content knowledge for teaching to be able to accomplish that.
Hmm.
And if they don't, we're being unfair with our expectations. And so, how can we support our teachers to understand the mathematics that they teach? And what does that even mean?
Hmm.
And so, that's been something I continue to examine and support through my whole career.
Hmm. Maybe not 40 graduate credits of math, but maybe a very strong mathematics content knowledge. Some mutual friends of ours, Zandra De Rajo, Amber Candela, I work with them closely. And over the years, we also keep coming back to the content knowledge and how that does really seem to undergird a lot of what we ask or what we hope for in teaching. A lot of it is based on a fairly solid understanding of the math in the school. So, yeah, I resonate with how you're describing that there.
And the tricky part is we can't just expect teachers to get what they need during their pre-service education. And often, when people seek professional development, they don't often enough seek the math, right? So, how do we understand deeply the mathematics we teach for teaching? Well, that's hard. And especially when we're looking at, well, I would say all grades, because high school teachers go into teaching because they're comfortable with the math the way they learned it. But that doesn't mean that they're comfortable with mathematics for teaching. So it's convincing people they need it and then providing it in a useful way that they can implement with.
Hmm. Well, a lot of your work with teachers, I believe, has happened through the your relationship with Solution Tree. You've been very active with Solution Tree, the publishing house, for a long time. I was going to go back to when did that relationship start? How did you get linked up with Solution Tree?
That started around when Common Core came to be. So Tim Kainold approached me and asked if I would co-write a series supporting the Common Core, helping people to understand what that meant because of my work with discourse and math knowledge for teaching. So I wrote with him, and it was a wonderful experience and I think a valuable set of books for the time. But I wanted to dig more deeply into the math knowledge for teaching aspects. And his primary focus was on the PLC at work and the mathematics in the PLC at work aspects. And so we went our separate ways. He continued on that path, and I focused on making sense of mathematics for teaching and co-wrote a series, a book and video series on that with Thomasina Adams, who I was in graduate school with, and Ed Nolan, who I served on NCTM committees with. We had co-chaired the Student Math Notes Committee, which was a committee that focused on creating math problems for teachers to use and implement during instruction.
And that making sense of mathematics for teaching has really blossomed into a vibrant book series. So I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more. If somebody is not familiar with that series, what would they find if they picked up one of those books, and what's the lay of the land of that series?
Sure. So we originally wrote four books focused by grade band, K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, and high school. Within those books, we chose what we felt were key mathematical ideas that teachers would benefit from, more focused on from the teacher's perspective, the math knowledge for teaching perspective of those math topics. So in 3, 5, fractions took a large chunk of the 3, 5 grade band book. But beyond that, we wanted teachers to do the mathematics as learners. So we began with each chapter with tasks that teachers would engage in, but then go backstage and see what does it look like from the teacher's perspective when you implement these same sorts of tasks with students. What we find is that, and my research and other research has supported this, that when you think about math instruction, I have a clear idea of what it looks like to me, and you probably have a clear idea of what it looks like to you, and they might be different. And so we wanted to make sure that people were talking about and seeing the same vision. So we created classroom video that we embedded in the books with QR codes. So teachers engaged in the tasks. We unpack the tasks along a learning trajectory. And then we include classroom video of one of the authors implementing the tasks with students of the grade band so we can unpack what happened during that instruction. And we do that with each of the grade band books.
Yeah, to me, it sounds like a really good blend of rich mathematics content itself, but also some unpacking for teachers, and then the videos sort of seeing it in action. So a nice blend of all of it kind of coming together.
Thank you. I'm proud of the series, and that was our goal.
Hmm, wonderful. I also, when I was prepping for this interview, I always get to know the person more, going through this process, and I hope the listeners get to know people more as well. But I noticed this other book that had not crossed my radar in math education, although it might have some connections. But I wonder if you might just speak about this book. It's called A Stroke of Luck: A Girl's Second Chance at Life. And if I'm not mistaken, did you write this with your daughter?
I did. I wrote this with my younger daughter, Jessica, and we wrote it detailing my older daughter, Alex's journey from getting sick, ultimately having a stroke, and then her recovery or our attempts at recovery from that stroke. And it is my proudest work because it highlights a journey of a child, my child, but aren't we in education to support children and children to learn? And part of that journey was reteaching Alex, my daughter, because after her stroke at age 12, she had to start over academically. I honestly feel that I am such a better educator because I had to reteach Alex. And so the book details a lot of that. And you're right, I did write it with my daughter, Jessica. She was 11, and we were writing together. She would write her chapters, I would write mine. We'd read each other's. And she would say, Mom, you need to write with more expression. And I would say, Jessica, I have a PhD. I think I've got this. And so our editor, our professional editor, read our chapters, and hers were fine, my daughter's were fine, and I had to rewrite all of mine with more expression.
Yep.
And sound on my younger daughter. My older daughter, Alex, is the one who just got married a week ago,
Oh,
where
wow.
Thomasina Adams officiated. My younger daughter, Jessica, is getting her PhD in neuroscience.
Mm.
And so she is now a researcher as well, probably not writing with the same level of expression that she used to.
Hey, but honestly, I think a lot of academics need that advice of putting a little more emotion, make it a little bit more, gripping. But whenever I try that, the reviewers always tell me to take it out, so it's tough.
It is, and so I think research, we might need to work on our balance as well. I agree
Mhm.
with you.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on that book. Yeah, I've had some stroke instances in my family, in my extended family, so I might need to check this out for some summer reading. I was impressed. Congratulations on the reviews. Like hundreds of reviews, very positive online. So it seems
Thank
worth
you.
checking out. But yeah.
Thank you very much. And I mean, it ultimately has a happy ending, right?
Hmm.
So you'll want to know that as you're reading it.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I want to ask you a few kind of summary questions to kind of step back a little bit. So, congratulations on your retirement. Well earned, as you can tell from this long body of work. But I wonder, even though you're retired, you're still pondering, you're still thinking. I was wondering, in your own line of research and questions you were pursuing, is there still something that's kind of on your mind still as kind of unanswered or still nagging at the back of your neck?
Yes. So while I've retired from the university, I'm still doing quite a bit of consulting, supporting teachers and school districts around North America. And as I go all over the place, I ask teachers, what is it that I can help you with right now? What's a just-in-time need? And so many say to support them with engaging their students, they're struggling with student engagement. And so then when you think about why are they struggling with student engagement, just recently when I had quite a few doctoral students from a project that I had with Sarah Bush and Lisa Brooks, the students that I supported were examining something that I had been working with for quite a while, and it was scaffolding, providing scaffolding just in time versus just in case. And what we find is that when teachers are worried about how students will perform, we provide scaffolding just in case students might need it, as opposed to just in time. And my curiosity is that what's causing students to lower their engagement? I mean, I know we know that there's so many things competing and teaching is really hard now and being a student is difficult, but is it the scaffolding that's causing students to lose interest? Are we smoothing the path so much that we're not enticing students to engage? And so I'm curious about that. Another curiosity that's connected to the most recent book that I published is I published a book on fact fluency. And I'm interested in how to support fact fluency at the same time as we deepen reasoning. So we talked earlier about balance with research and writing with feeling. We also should think about balancing learning things with efficiency and thinking deeply about what we're doing. And so I think fluency is a space for that. So those are both curiosities to me,
Hmm.
and we need to stay curious. If we're going to stay working with teachers and in schools, we must stay curious. So
Hmm.
I'm happy I'm curious about those.
Yeah. And those seem like they cut deeply to like the heart of teaching. Those are not like peripheral concerns. Those are kind of like right down to the core of how are we teaching? How are the students engaging with these ideas? The one you said about maybe something being too smoothed and it actually kind of can decrease engagement. I've been pondering about teaching based on inspiration from movies and storytelling. So, like, what makes a good movie, and then can we use that to sort of make a really compelling lesson that draws people in? I've taken that a few different directions. But what it made me think of there is like, who would enjoy a show or who would enjoy a movie if it just all goes very smoothly and everything is just like, yep, to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing? It's actually pretty boring. Like, you kind of are just going to check out. You need some drama that gets in there, like, oh my gosh, that got messed up, or like, oh, what's going to happen when we drop this thing into the story? So you need some of those moments that actually just activate your human interest, you know?
I love that. I love that so much. And we tell students the punchline too early. For example, when adding fractions, and we say, don't forget, what do we do with the denominators?
Yeah.
Right now we know
Yeah.
the
So
punch.
that it should be spoiler alert, right? Like it's
Right.
like I just spoiled the yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. We need to not have spoilers at all if we can help it.
So, what about stepping out not just your own work or your own inquiry, but just for the field of math education? I like to ask senior scholars for their perspective on what do you see as a key idea or a key problem that our field needs to work on in the next few years, say?
I think we need to rebalance. We are focusing appropriately on social emotional learning, but I think we're losing sight of math knowledge for teaching. And so I think look at look at conferences, look at tables of content in our articles in our journals, and I'm not seeing a balance. So I think that we need to keep our eye on all that's important in teaching and learning, not just one aspect.
Mm. I've definitely noticed that shift from like when I was in grad school, for example. Like in
Hmm.
grad school, there would be a pretty solid mix of things where they go deeply onto some math content, how the students are thinking about it, some teaching techniques for it, and then other things that are looking at other aspects of this complex classroom environment and young people. But yeah, I've also noticed recently, like you say, in the conference when I'm looking through the programs, like, oh, the content stuff is almost hard to find now at this point.
Correct. And I think that's a problem. But I don't want to remove our focus on the student
No, it's a
and
both
the
and.
student
It's got
voice.
to be a both and. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for sharing a little bit about your career. I do want to ask though, what if you hadn't gone into math ed? If you weren't in math ed at all, is there something else you could have imagined as a career for yourself?
Absolutely. I want to be an astronaut. I haven't given it up.
Oh,
I still want to be an astronaut.
uh-huh.
My very first book I ever co-wrote or co-edited was Mission Mathematics 2. I did that with Mike Hines, an NCTM publication. We did the middle school book on how can we incorporate math in the work of NASA. And I got to work with astronauts and I got to work in their International Space Station simulator. And I was living my dream of wanting to be an astronaut. So it was either math educator or astronaut when I was in seventh grade.
Hmm.
Both were exciting. And you know which path I took.
Yeah, it's an exciting time now though, because as we record this, Artemis 2 is like pretty far from Earth. I'm not sure exactly where they are now, but that's been fun to watch.
Very fun. And where I live, I was able to watch them take off from my balcony.
Really?
So that was
Wow.
exciting. Yeah.
That is great. Well, Julie, thanks so much. It was great having the conversation with you.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.